The Andrade family's mansion stood like a monument to perfection. From the outside, everything about them whispered wealth and stability: the wide iron gates, the manicured gardens, the shimmering chandeliers that poured golden light through tall windows. But inside, behind those marble walls, the family carried a sorrow that had slowly hardened into resignation. Their only son, Daniel, had been diagnosed as deaf at the age of 3. No expense had been spared. The best specialists from Europe and America had been flown in. Therapies, machines, and whispered promises from doctors filled the mansion for years. Yet every consultation ended with the same conclusion: Daniel would never hear. At first, the parents fought the verdict. They clung to hope like a rope in the dark. But as years passed, and after countless reassurances from medical experts, their faith collapsed. By the time Daniel turned 6, his mother often confessed to friends at lavish dinners, "I've given up. My son will never hear my voice." His father, a rigid man with a cold presence, would nod and say, "We will give him the best life money can buy. That is what matters." In their minds the case was closed. But not everyone in that house believed the story. Elena had arrived in the mansion quietly, almost invisibly. She was just a young nanny, hired to watch Daniel when his parents traveled or disappeared into endless social commitments. She had no wealth, no power, and no claim to the Andrade fortune. She was expected to serve silently, caring for the boy without question. Yet within weeks of her arrival, Elena began to notice the cracks in the perfect picture. It started small. One afternoon, while she was folding laundry in Daniel's room, the heavy wooden door slammed shut from a gust of wind. Daniel's shoulders jerked. His head turned sharply toward the sound. Elena froze, the folded shirt slipping from her hands. "Strange," she whispered. That looked like a reaction. She brushed it off, convincing herself it might have been coincidence. But then it happened again. When his name was called from another room, Daniel seemed to glance toward the voice. When the family's large retriever barked in the garden, he giggled softly. The pattern repeated so often that Elena's doubts grew into certainty. One evening, as she cleared away toys from the floor, a glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. The noise was sharp and sudden. Daniel jumped, eyes wide, his little body stiff with fright. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. "You heard that?" Kneeling in front of him, she placed her hands on his shoulders. Her voice trembled. "Daniel, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes widened, but his lips stayed sealed. He turned away, silent as a statue. That night Elena could barely sleep. The idea tore through her thoughts. What if Daniel wasn't deaf at all? The following days turned into a secret experiment. She whistled softly while pretending to look elsewhere. She hummed lullabies under her breath. She asked questions while turning her back. Again and again Daniel reacted. A flick of his eyes, a tilt of his head, a startled giggle when she sang an old nursery rhyme. The signs piled up like evidence in a courtroom. Still, Elena knew the danger of speaking aloud. She was just an employee. If she dared to question the doctors, if she accused the family of being wrong, she could be fired in disgrace, accused of lying or trying to grab attention. At a dinner one evening she overheard Daniel's mother sigh, "I've accepted it. My boy will never hear me." The father's reply was colder, "We must protect him, not give him false hope. Money can buy him comfort if not sound." Elena lowered her eyes. Her heart screamed to speak, but fear chained her tongue. To remain silent meant Daniel would live his life in a prison of silence that wasn't truly his. But to speak could mean losing everything. The pressure grew heavier each day until one night as she tucked him into bed, Daniel looked at her with trembling lips and whispered, so faintly she almost thought she imagined it, "Don't say anything." Elena froze. Her breath caught in her throat. That was not coincidence. He had spoken. Her hands shook as she brushed back his hair. "Daniel, you can talk?" The boy's face paled. He pulled the blanket over his head, body trembling. He said nothing more. But that one whisper had already rewritten Elena's entire reality. She sat in the dark room long after he fell asleep, her heart a storm of fear and determination. The truth was no longer hidden. Daniel could hear. He could speak. And yet, he had chosen silence. What secret forced a child to deny his own voice? Elena realized the problem ran deeper than misdiagnosis. Something or someone had taught Daniel to hide his gift. She felt a responsibility pressing down on her chest. The boy was trapped in fear, and she was the only one who had noticed. Her decision was forming, heavy but inevitable. She could no longer ignore the truth. But how could a simple nanny challenge the will of a family as powerful as the Andrades? The mansion's marble walls suddenly felt like a cage, echoing with secrets. And Elena knew, if she stayed silent, Daniel's life would remain stolen by a lie. The days that followed Daniel's whispered plea were heavy with unspoken tension. Elena walked the long hallways of the mansion carrying trays, folding linens, and managing her usual chores, but her mind was consumed by one thought: Daniel can hear. He's hiding it. Every glance at the boy carried new meaning. Every small reaction, his eyes flicking toward a sound, the twitch of a smile at a melody, felt like proof carved in stone. Yet his silence was deliberate, guarded, almost desperate. Elena knew she needed to be careful. If the parents noticed her probing, she might lose her position before she could help the child. So she devised quiet tests. At breakfast, when the family dog barked outside, she hummed a tune softly while spooning porridge into Daniel's bowl. The boy's fingers tapped lightly against the table, matching the rhythm. Her heart raced. He's following the music. During playtime, she whispered his name when she pretended to be focused on cleaning. His head turned ever so slightly, though he quickly masked it with a distant stare. Late one evening, she set down a candle and let it burn low while she folded his pajamas. When the flame finally flickered out, she struck a match. Daniel flinched at the sharp sound, his little body curling into itself. The evidence was undeniable. But the greater mystery gnawed at her. Why was he pretending? Children do not willingly embrace silence. They crave sound, laughter, voices. So why would Daniel choose to remain in a cage that wasn't real? One night, Elena found her answer, not fully but enough to wound her heart. As she tucked him into bed, his wide eyes glistened under the dim lamp. In a trembling voice, softer than a sigh, he whispered, "Don't tell them." The words cut her. Why, Daniel? Why not? The boy only shook his head and buried himself under the blanket. His small body trembled as though the shadows in the room were listening. Elena sat beside him for hours, torn between fear and determination. She realized then, someone had taught him to be silent. Someone had told him it was safer not to speak. The mansion's evenings grew colder, not in temperature but in spirit. The family's wealth glittered around Elena, gold frames, silk curtains, the heavy scent of imported candles, but the house felt like a hollow museum. Its most precious treasure, Daniel's voice, remained locked away. Elena's instinct screamed at her to intervene, but she was caught in a storm of doubt. She had no authority. If she dared confront the parents, would they believe her? Or would they accuse her of madness, of seeking attention? At a dinner party one night, she overheard the mother murmur to a friend, "I have given up. My son will never hear me." The words carried the weight of sorrow. Elena's chest tightened. If only the woman could see what Elena saw daily. The father's response was colder, almost mechanical. "Our duty is to provide him everything money can buy. That will be enough." Elena lowered her gaze. In that instant, she knew if she ever spoke out, it wouldn't be met with gratitude. It might end with her dismissal or worse, Daniel being forced deeper into silence. The turning point came one morning as sunlight streamed through Daniel's window. Elena had brought a small flashlight to amuse him. She played a game of pointing its beam into corners, making shadows dance on the wall. Daniel laughed quietly, chasing the light with eager eyes. Then, without warning, she turned the beam toward his ear and whispered, "I know you hear me. Don't be afraid." Daniel froze. His laughter vanished. His wide eyes locked on her, filled with a mixture of terror and longing. In that fragile silence, Elena felt the truth pressing against them like a storm ready to break. Just then the door creaked open. Daniel's father stepped into the room. Elena's blood turned cold. The flashlight slipped from her hand, clattering against the carpet. The father's stern eyes darted between his son's expression and Elena's pale face. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty crossed his features. Something unspoken hung in the air, thick and heavy. Elena's heart pounded. One wrong word could ruin her. One slip could end everything. But before she could speak, Daniel broke the silence. "Dad," his voice trembled, I hear you." The words struck like thunder. The father staggered, his large frame leaning against the doorframe as if his knees threatened to give way. He stared at his son, eyes wide, disbelief battling with recognition. Elena's throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes, but she stayed silent, terrified of being accused of deception. The father stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the room. He knelt before Daniel, his voice breaking in a way Elena had never heard before. "Why didn't you tell us, son?" Daniel looked down, twisting the edge of his blanket in his tiny hands. His answer was simple, but it pierced like a blade. "Because no one listened." The words shattered the silence that had gripped the house for years. At that moment, Elena knew the world inside the Andrade mansion would never be the same again. The father's whisper still hung in the air, trembling with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell us, son?" And Daniel's reply, those 4 devastating words, echoed through the mansion like a ghost. "Because no one listened." Elena's chest tightened. She had never heard such a painful truth spoken so simply. The father sat frozen, his strong hands gripping his knees, his proud face lined with shock. His son, who for years had been trapped in silence, had just spoken with clarity that stripped away every excuse. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daniel's mother appeared at the doorway, drawn by the sound of voices where there should have been none. Her eyes darted from her husband's stunned expression to Elena, pale and trembling, and finally to Daniel, whose lips still quivered from speaking. "What is happening here?" she demanded, her voice sharp as though she feared the answer. Daniel lowered his eyes, shrinking back into the bed, his fingers clutching the blanket like a shield. The father turned toward his wife, words failing him. It was Daniel who broke the silence again. His voice shook, but it was undeniable. "Mom, I hear you." The world seemed to stop. The mother staggered forward, clutching the doorframe as if the walls themselves had shifted. Her voice rose in protest. "No, that's not possible. The doctors said, every one of them said." Her words cracked under their own weight. Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head violently, refusing to believe what her ears had just heard. They all confirmed it. He was deaf. He had to be deaf. Daniel's small voice pierced her panic. "I always heard you cry at night. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you wouldn't believe me." The mother's hands flew to her mouth. Her sobs broke free like water bursting from a dam. She collapsed to her knees beside the bed, clutching Daniel's tiny hands with desperation. All the pride, all the elegance that defined her in the city's eyes, melted into raw grief. "I failed you," she whispered through tears. "All those nights, you heard me and I didn't even try to believe in you. I failed you, my son." Elena stood frozen in the corner, torn between guilt and relief. She wanted to comfort them, but she feared her presence would only ignite anger. After all, she had been the first to see the truth. Would they accuse her of meddling, of feeding the boy false ideas? Or would they see that she had only dared to listen where others would not? The father, who had been silent, finally stepped forward. His arms wrapped tightly around Daniel, pulling him against his chest. His voice cracked, heavy with years of repressed emotion. "I don't care what the doctor said. I don't care what anyone says. You are my son and I will never doubt you again." The boy's small arms clung to his father's neck. For the first time, Daniel's muffled sobs filled the room, not the silence of fear but the sound of release. Elena's tears spilled freely now. She pressed her hand to her lips, the sight too powerful to restrain. But as the family embraced, a dark thought gnawed at her. Will they turn against me when the shock fades? Will they accuse me of withholding the truth? Her fears weren't unfounded. The mother, after clinging to her son for several minutes, finally lifted her gaze to Elena. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, but suspicion lingered there. "You knew." Her voice was soft, yet sharp as glass. Elena lowered her head. I suspected. I saw things, signs that didn't match. But I had no proof. I didn't want to cause harm if I was wrong." The mother's lips trembled. "And yet you said nothing. You let me live years believing my child would never hear my voice." The accusation cut deep. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I swear, Senora, I only wanted to protect him. If I spoke too soon, if I challenged the doctors, you would have dismissed me. And then Daniel would still be alone in silence. I waited for the right moment, for him to reveal the truth himself." The father raised a hand, silencing the room. His expression was unreadable, torn between anger and gratitude. For a long moment, no one breathed. Finally, he turned to Elena. His voice was hoarse, but his words carried weight. "Thank you. You saw what we could not." Elena's knees weakened. Relief flooded her chest, yet she remained quiet, humbled by the raw vulnerability before her. The mother, still shaken, turned back to her son. She cupped his cheeks, whispering, "Say something again, Daniel. Please, anything." Daniel looked at her with eyes too wise for his age. He hesitated, as if still uncertain whether his words would be trusted. But then he whispered, trembling, "I hear you, Mom." The woman broke down once more, clinging to him as though those 3 words were worth more than every jewel in her collection. The following days passed in a blur of disbelief and revelation. The family summoned new specialists, not to confirm deafness, but to understand why Daniel had hidden his ability. The results were clear. Daniel's hearing was perfect. There was no damage, no loss. The misdiagnosis had been devastatingly wrong. The doctors explained what Elena already knew in her heart. A child so young, surrounded by adults who insisted he could not hear, might accept that role without question. Over time, reinforced by fear and pressure, Daniel had learned to bury the truth. He had chosen silence because no one had ever believed his voice. The mother wept openly at this revelation, her pride broken into shards. Every night she sat by Daniel's bed, speaking to him softly, as if to reclaim years of lost conversation. At first he listened silently, cautious, but slowly his replies grew more confident. "Good night, Mom." "Yes, I hear you." Those simple words healed wounds that wealth could never touch. The father changed too. He began taking Daniel to his office, not to hide him away but to show him the world. He introduced him to employees, told him stories, asked him questions, treating him not as a fragile burden but as his son. For the first time, the boy felt pride glowing in his father's eyes. And Elena, watching from the shadows, felt both joy and unease. She had been the bridge between silence and truth, yet her place in the household was uncertain. One evening, as she folded her apron in preparation to leave, the mother entered quietly. "Don't go," she said, her voice stripped of formality. "This house needs you. My son needs you." Elena's heart swelled, but she bowed her head. "I only did what anyone with a heart would do, listen when others would not." The mother embraced her, tears streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, Elena no longer felt like a servant but like family. Yet even as light filled the mansion again, one question lingered in Elena's heart. How many years of Daniel's life had been stolen by silence because the world chose not to listen? That truth weighed heavily on her, but she also knew it carried the seed of hope. Daniel had found his voice and now nothing would silence him again. The Andrade mansion, once a hollow palace of silence, began to echo with a new sound, Daniel's voice. At first it was timid, broken like glass edges, but with every passing day it grew stronger. Where once he had nodded or gestured, now he spoke, asking questions that tumbled out faster than his parents could answer. "Why is the sky blue? Can we visit the park? Dad, what do you do in your office?" The boy who had been written off as silent suddenly flooded the house with curiosity, laughter, and wonder. For his parents, every word was a miracle. His mother, who had once spent nights crying alone, now spent evenings by his side, telling him stories until he drifted to sleep. Each time Daniel answered, her tears returned, but these were tears of joy, not sorrow. His father, a man who had built his life on authority and control, softened. He took Daniel by the hand to meetings, showing him the bustling offices that powered their empire. He introduced his son to workers, not as a fragile boy but proudly, with words that stunned Elena. "This is my son. He is stronger than anyone knows." Elena too noticed the shift. She was no longer invisible in the household. Where once her place had been confined to shadows, now she was invited to sit at the table, to share meals, to smile without fear of reprimand. Daniel clung to her often, his trust in her unshakable. Yet Elena carried a humility that kept her grounded. "I only listened," she would say whenever gratitude was heaped upon her. But in truth she had done much more. She had given Daniel his freedom back, and in doing so she had healed a family that had been breaking under the weight of silence. The world beyond the mansion. News of Daniel's recovery spread quietly at first, whispered among relatives and close friends. Some doubted it. Others marveled at the mystery of a boy misdiagnosed for years. But the Andrade family no longer cared for whispers or judgment. For the first time, their wealth seemed secondary to what they had gained, a living miracle in their own son's laughter. Doctors revisited the case, analyzing the boy's past. They admitted, reluctantly, that an error had been made. Early assessments, coupled with the parents' readiness to believe the experts, had reinforced the wrong conclusion. No one had stopped to question the child himself. The tragedy of that realization cut deeply. Daniel had grown in an environment where silence was expected of him, and he had obeyed, not out of defiance but out of fear. His mother confessed her guilt to Elena late one night. "I trusted the world more than I trusted my own child. And for that, I lost years I can never take back." Elena reached for her hand. "But now you have him. And he has you. The past cannot be undone, but the future is yours to write together." The mother wept, but this time she clung to hope instead of despair. Elena considered leaving many times. She had fulfilled what she saw as her mission, revealing the truth. But every time she packed her small bag, Daniel found her. He would grab her hand, his eyes wide with fear that she might vanish like a dream. One afternoon, as she quietly folded her clothes, the mother entered. Her voice was gentle but firm. "You can't leave us. This house needs you, Elena. My son needs you." Elena lowered her gaze. "I am only a servant." "No," the woman insisted, shaking her head. "You are the one who saw what even a mother's eyes could not. You gave me back my son. That is not the work of a servant, that is the work of family." For the first time, Elena allowed herself to believe that perhaps she did belong within those cold walls, which no longer felt so cold. As months passed, Daniel blossomed. The boy who had once been silent now filled the halls with laughter, questions, and the sweet noise of childhood. He learned songs quickly, sang them with pride, and asked Elena to clap for him. At school, teachers marveled at his progress. "It's as though he's been waiting for this moment his whole life," one remarked. And perhaps he had. His confidence grew daily, not just in speech but in spirit. Where once he had hidden behind blankets and silence, now he spoke with courage. To his parents, every syllable was a priceless gift. One evening, after a long day, Daniel ran to his father with a drawing he had made. It was crude, drawn with crayons but clear, a family of 4 standing together, smiling. At the center was a small boy with wide eyes and an open mouth. Underneath, in shaky letters, Daniel had written, "I hear you." The father's eyes filled with tears. He lifted his son high into the air and whispered, "And I will always listen." Time softened the wounds of silence, but it never erased the lesson. Elena often thought of it as she walked the mansion's corridors. Sometimes she paused at the grand staircase, remembering the quiet weight that had once suffocated the house. Now those same walls carried echoes of laughter, questions, and bedtime stories. The silence had been broken not by wealth, not by doctors, but by courage and love. One evening, as the family gathered in the garden, Elena watched them, Daniel perched between his parents, his voice bright as he recounted his day. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the sounds to wash over her. The narrator within her heart whispered a truth that had taken years to surface. Sometimes the longest silences are not born of inability, but of fear of not being believed. And when someone dares to listen with the heart, they uncover truths that can change destinies. The Andrade family had once believed their wealth was their greatest possession. But in time they learned the truth. The greatest treasure was not in bank accounts or estates. It was in the voice of a little boy they had nearly lost to silence, and in the courage of one woman who refused to stop listening.